Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar brought to you by Bursa Malaysia and managed by our company LifeChamp. So this is Shane Chu. I'll be a moderator for these sessions. So today we're going to look into this topic, which is ESG investing, opportunities in green energy. Now, in the past, we have already done 2 webinars on ESG, but due to popular demand, we are inviting David back for another session on ESG. Today, we're going to look into where are the opportunities in green energy. Now, as you know, ESG has become increasingly more important due to many funds, whether local or foreign funds, have an increasing higher rating for all the ESG. That means ESG plays a very important emphasis in their investment criteria. So today we're going to look into how this ESG and investing is all about, and where are the opportunities in the green energy field in our locally listed company. All right, disclaimer. Whatever we share on this webinar is only for educational purpose. So if we do any case study, it's only for educational purpose. So in no way that I give any recommendation to buy or any recommendation to sell any companies. So if you decide to make any investment decisions as a result of this webinar, so you're 100% responsible for all your investment decisions. All right, cool. So allow me to briefly introduce our speaker today. And David asked me to keep his introduction short. Okay, as an engineer by training, so our speaker here, David, began his career as an engineer in the telco industry for 10 years before turning to his passion in value investing. So he has served as a director in the local equities education research firm for 3 years, managing research efforts and delivering advanced value investing and portfolio management education series. So David is now a full-time investor and dedicates his time and resources to nurture the youth in financial literacy. He is often invited to speak in broker seminars, webinars, as well as other Bursa endorsed events, and his professional comments and opinions on value investing are often featured in business publications like Focus Malaysia. So David also provides consultation services in value investing and advanced portfolio strategies for high net worth individuals. So David, welcome to our webinar today.
Hi, Shane. Thanks again. Thanks again for inviting me to your platform to talk about. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes,
Cool.
yes, can hear you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. You see, I had a very simple haircut.
Yeah.
That will help me, right?
Jealous
Yeah,
me.
it feels
My hair is
better now.
growing like
How's everyone doing?
much.
Hope you guys are well, and I hope you guys are getting your vaccinations already. I just had mine a couple of days ago, so it was pretty interesting, huh? Yeah. So it's good that probably, actually, I would say whether it's fortunately or unfortunately that the badminton match is in the Olympics has just finished. Then at least we can concentrate on this webinar. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tonight, the title is going to be the third series on the ESG investing opportunities in green energy. Now, other than this disclaimer mentioned by Shane, I would just like to maybe openly disclose that actually this is not I'm not a subject matter expert when it comes to green energy. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit more about solar, because there are many ways of producing green energy, like renewables, like hydro, solar, wind, nuclear, right? So I am not a subject matter expert in this topic, but I motivate myself to know more about this. Why? Is because we believe that in the next years, even decades to come, right, this is going to be a mega trend. Now, in investing, it's all about identifying the next mega trend so that you know how to allocate your capital for better use, right? Of course, just logically, if I ask you, would you put your money, a lot of your money to invest in oil and gas? Logically, you won't say no. You will say no, right? So that's why we, at Spiral Thinker, we always try to, put our ears on the ground to make us, to make ourselves alert as well as informed about the trends in the industries. So that's why I think tonight is very timely that we talk about green energy as part of the third series of the ESG investing. So I'm going to split my discussion tonight into, again, like usual, 4 topics. I'm first going to touch a little bit on climate risks, which is a follow-up from what my previous session, as well as environmental challenges. Then I'm going to talk about this thing called the net zero emissions, or what we or in short form called NZE. Yeah, how the energy paradigm is being slowly transitioned to the NZE paradigm. Then, of course, I want to touch a little bit about the investment opportunities in green energy, particularly in context of Malaysia, or Bursa Malaysia. Then I'm going to talk. I'm going to show maybe 2 case studies. Apologies, tonight I won't have as many case studies as before because, again, as this is not my subject matter expert. So again, treat this as more like a discussion, as an introduction to you. I'm as much of a learner as you are in this topic. Yeah. So without much further ado, let's get to the first topic tonight, which is climate risks and environmental challenges. Yeah. Now, I'm just going to flash out one of the slides that I showed a couple of webinars before. I think it was from the ESG Investing. Yeah. So the gist of this slide is actually, as you can see, this slide is a financial in terms of risks as well as financial impact of global risks, which it was produced and published by We Forum organization. Now, as you can see here, they basically split the categories to 5: economic impact, environmental, geopolitical, society, as well as technological. Now, in the past, say in 2007, 2008, more than 10 years ago, right, you can see that the color that dominates are blue, right? So in the past, actually, economic risks actually dominates, the narratives in anything that we do, that we did before, especially when it comes to investing. But as you can see, as you can see the timeline from the left to right, the blue is just slowly being replaced to, I think in the middle there, of course, a lot of orange because I think that time Trump was the president of the United States, right? But you can see on the right-hand side, more and more green, which means environmental risks actually are perceived as more and more important. The impacts are much bigger than previously. So the focus on global societies and investors around the world are actually onto in environmental safety, especially on the sustainability of how we conduct our activities, right? And that's why this ESG investing is very important. Now, if you'd like to know more about this, you can refer to our webinar. I think sometime back in April or May on the topic. Okay. I'm sure that 2 weeks ago, just 2 weekends ago, I'm sure you have heard about all these floods happening concurrently around the world, right? I think the biggest news was actually the flooding happened in Henan, China. I'm sure you have seen videos, footages of people trapped in the subways, as well as on the roads, something like this. Then not only in China, actually a lot of places, including Germany, including New Zealand, including Arizona, US, they're all being flooded. And you think to yourself, why is this happening? Or should we be surprised that this is happening? And is there going to be an end to it? Now, I follow this pretty much closely because I don't know about you, but once you become a parent, a lot of your priorities start to change. You start to think about the future or the sustainability for your children, right? So that is why naturally this is one of my concerns, because I would like to leave this to a better place for my children as well as my children's children, right? But what comes to my mind every time when I talk about or I think about these natural disasters is actually this movie called Pacific Rim. I don't know if you remember. This Pacific Rim is actually a very cool movie where the monsters actually emerge from the core of the earth, and then they got these big robots, right? And one of the things that caught my attention was actually the frequency as well as the intervals of the monsters that appeared in the movie became shorter and shorter. Now, the way I interpret that movie, all right, so the monsters to me are all these natural disasters, okay? And you can actually, I'm sure if you tabulate all the natural disasters in the world, right, you notice that actually a lot of the frequencies of these natural disasters like flooding, volcano eruptions, earthquakes, right, they are becoming more and more frequent. The intervals may become more and more shorter. And why is this happening? Is it because are we really heading towards the end of the world? All right. Of course, without touching into these conspiracy theories or beliefs or religious, agenda, right? Actually, a lot of things which are happening today about all these natural disasters are a lot of them are actually directly and indirectly related to human activities. And why do I say that? Um, One of the main reasons is actually global warming. Now, I know actually during the Trump administration, he branded global warming as a hoax. I totally disagree with that. I think global warming is a real and very big threat to humankind, not just you and me, it's the entire human race. And what causes global warming? There are many, of course, there are many reasons. Of course, there are natural causes, naturally, all right, as well as man-made causes and which we call anthropogenic, right? So, excuse me, I'm not going to talk too much about the natural causes of global warming. Right? You can read about it, you can just Google about it. But I want to talk about human man-made activities or human activities that causes global warming. I think all of us know fossil fuel is one of the biggest contributor of global warming. All right, agriculture and livestock as well. When we when we rear a lot of cattle or protein for animals, or their residues, their refuse, if it's not being treated properly, they'll actually cause a lot of carbon dioxide accumulation. Agriculture as well. Now, when we deforest, when we actually do a lot of large scale deforestation, we just take away the natural cycle, the natural carbon dioxide cycle. Okay, urbanization, again, we cut down trees, we level out hills, and we level out the environment in order to build more settlement for humans to live in. Now, all in all, and this is not happening just in a year or two or couple decades. This is happening for decades and decades previously, and it is going to continue. All right, and all these human activities we combine together lead to this thing what we call the GHG, greenhouse gases. Now, I know previously, I think 2 decades ago, the big term that was being used was actually the depletion of ozone layer, right? Now, ozone is just one of the greenhouse gas effects. In fact, what makes greenhouse gas effect is actually all these, carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane from oil and gas emissions, so on and so forth, right? And why is greenhouse gas effect, GHG, is so important? Because as you can see here, it is one of the reasons or one of the main contributors of our temperature rising. Now, this is a chart I got from Wikipedia. Basically, it's a change of temperature around the world in the last 50 years. And they tabulate by color, which I like. As you can see here, actually, the redder you are means actually the temperature has risen, much more than 50 years ago. They may say, hey, look at this. This red color is between 2 to 4% only, right? Actually, this 2 to 4% is a big deal, and you can Google about it. Actually, a lot of our ice caps are melting. All right, and what is the impact of that? When more and more tons and tons of ice caps are melting, the water has to go somewhere, right? And that is why the sea level will slowly increase as well. Now, and this will also lead to other natural phenomena like the typhoon. In this part of the world, we call it typhoon. On the Pacific, maybe in the Central American side, it's called typhoon. It's called cyclones. Basically the same thing. All right. What happens is when the cool air is blowing on the ocean surface, which is warmer, it's becoming warmer and warmer, right? It will cause this process called condensation. Now, and then you learn in physics back in high school that cold water comes down and cold air comes down and then hot air goes up, right? So when there's such exchange, and then eventually, right, when the entire situation is correct, is right, it will cause these cyclone or typhoons to form. And because of this global warming, as well as higher sea level, and rising temperature, right, the magnitude of these typhoon or cyclones are just going to get bigger and bigger, which means that the damage, the 杀伤力 in Chinese you call it, right, the power, I mean their power, right, is going to get bigger and bigger. Just like, in Pacific Rim, the monsters get bigger and bigger, right? So, and this will only, there's no way to reverse this, unfortunately, unless you can find a way, to slow down the ice cap from melting, the sea level from rising, or the other way is to assess what we are doing now, what we are so used to, and see how we can see whether there are ways that we can, change from our behavior as well as the way we live our life, as well as how we consume the natural resources, to see how we can slow down this effect. Now, I personally don't believe that we can reverse, but at least we can slow down this effect in order to prolong the sustainability. Okay, so I'm sorry, I've got to spend a little bit more time to talk about this, because it's very important, and it's something which is very important in my heart. Okay, now of course, with climate change, with global warming, they'll lead to all sorts of devastating impacts, around the world, whether it's society or health or environmental, right? You can read all about it. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but you can read from it here, right? But what is important is a lot of countries around the world start to wake up, a lot of industry players as well, especially the energy industry. And that is why they came out with this thing called the net zero emissions. They set a target. This was a initiative, I think, by IEA, International Energy Association, IEA, agency. The NZE 2050 target is actually the world's first comprehensive energy roadmap that actually shows governments are being serious. They want to take action to rapidly boost the usage of clean energy, as well as reduce the consumption of fossil fuel. All right, and in a way, this will also create a lot of economic impact by introducing new jobs, as well as economic activities that can be sustainable in terms of the environmental health. Okay, so that's why we have this topic tonight. We talk about this net zero emission 2050. This is not new, don't get me wrong. It has been around for a number of years, but this target 2050 is only for the net zero emissions for carbon dioxide. Okay, as you know, as I mentioned earlier on, carbon dioxide is just one of the GHG gases. It's not the only one. So that's why the first milestone that we are targeting is the net zero emissions of carbon dioxide by 2050. All right, and that's how and with this, I want to talk about the next topic, which is how is the energies industry going to transition from the current state to a net zero state, right? Net zero emission state. First of all, let's look at the definition. What is the meaning of net zero emission? All right, sounds very cool, right? NZE. Actually, it's something very simple. Basically, net zero emissions means it is a balanced state whereby the amount of greenhouse gases emitted into the environment is being counterbalanced by removing the same amount of GHGs from the atmosphere. Okay, that's why they call it carbon removal. So as I mentioned earlier on, the anthropogenic causes emissions such as from the fossil fuel vehicles and factories. Our manufacturing plants uses a lot of energy, right? Which actually a lot of them are being produced using very dirty elements like coal or oil, and should be reduced as close as possible to zero. All right, and any remaining greenhouse gases should then be balanced with the equivalent amount of carbon removal. All right, which can be happen through a myriad of things like capturing the carbon. They call it the direct air capture and storage, by capturing the CO2 produced from all these activities and pumping them directly back into the ground. These are things that they're looking at. And all this is in order to achieve what we call the net zero, the climate neutrality. Now, as I mentioned before, the timeline for the first milestone is the net zero emissions for carbon dioxide. Now, there are two scenarios here. So this is the optimistic scenario, and this is the less optimistic scenario. Of course, there are technical elements to it. I think it's something to do about the amount of global warming that they can sustain. I'm not too sure about technicality, but basically in layman's terms, this is this part. by 2050, net zero emissions for carbon dioxide is the optimistic version. The less optimistic is 20 years later. Okay, now that is not the end of the story. In fact, after this milestone is reached, which I really hope that they will be achieved. The next milestone is the net zero greenhouse gases effect. This is even bigger, right? So you can see the mega trend of the shift of the focus, priorities, as I would say, that actually governments around the world are looking at. Okay, and as I mentioned, the first milestone to achieve net zero carbon dioxide is actually, there are a series of things that we can do. Again, just like to highlight, actually a lot of activities can produce carbon dioxide. It's not just from transportation, it's not just from manufacturing. Um, Generation of electricity also produces carbon dioxide, especially when you burn coal, when you burn oil and gas, especially gas, Buildings, the cooling of buildings also create a lot of carbon dioxide as well as other activities, all right? But one of the activities that is very relevant to you and I, all right? You and I, regardless of where you are, right? We contribute to carbon dioxide emissions into the world. As just, you turn on your engine, you go into your car, you turn on the engine, you drive out, right? You're already contributing. That is why one of the easiest low-hanging fruit is actually to tackle the transportation industry. Now, of course, first and foremost, the first thing that governments around the world will do is actually to stop any more large-scale investments or expansion of the oil and gas fields all around the world. That's why you see a lot of these primary these PSCs major oil companies are selling assets around the world. Recently, a lot of companies a lot of these MNCs are selling the oil and gas fields in Malaysia. Some local companies like Hibiscus are picking them up, right? Then that is something they can do. Then, of course, other than that, governments around the world is also incentivizing the use of electric vehicles as replacement of the traditional ICE, the internal combustion engines, right? And I talked about this in my previous webinar just 2 weeks ago, right? You can watch all about it. Actually, the general target is by 2030, right? 60% of the global car sales are all electric. Now, there are many different types of electric vehicles. You can read all about it from a previous webinar. And then by 2035, 5 years later, 50% of heavy trucks are electric. No more new ICE car sales, so they're very serious about this. They try to do this, and then, of course, by 2040, so on and so forth, there are other milestones as well. So the end in line is by 2050, we should be able to reach at least somewhere near the net zero carbon dioxide. Okay, so that is the dream, which I personally hope will be achieved. Now, why is transportation so important? Why is it at the focus of these net zero emissions? All right. First and foremost, as I mentioned before, everyone is contributing to this, right? Now, a lot of people think or assume that oil and gas companies produce a lot of carbon dioxide when they drill, when they mine when they extract the oil from the ground or from the sea or from the sands, right? True. All right, it's partially true. As you can see here, this is a infographic from IHS Markit, all right, a research company. As you can see here, actually, from the well, which is from the mine, so the oil well to the tank, all right, which includes processes like production, initial processing, transportation, refining, then transporting the refined product all the way to the consumer, right? It only contributes at most 30% of the carbon dioxide emissions, right? To tell the truth, when I read about this, I was very surprised because I thought that these processes will take, these activities will contribute bulk of the carbon emissions. But as you can see here, actually, it's on the contrary. The combustion of refined products like, our fuel, our gasoline, right, contributes as much as 70 to 80% of carbon dioxide. Now, this shows you, number one, how our transportation, activities are contributing to this. And secondly, it got me to think, hey, our engines which is around for so many years, are still so, I would say, inefficient. in terms of producing, managing the waste, okay? Because 70-80% of the carbon dioxide emissions come from our, refined product combustion. Of course, this is not just about transportation, it's also about cooling of buildings and whatnot, manufacturing, which I talked about just now, okay? So one of the protocols that they are like the leading authority, right, is actually what they call the GHGP and Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It is a partnership between World Resources Institute (WRI) and the Business Council for Sustainable Development. They basically split the entire protocol into 3 scopes. The first scope is to talk about, to manage or tackle the direct emissions from company-owned and controlled resources, all right, from oil and gas producers, from manufacturing firms, and so on and so forth. Scope 2 is about the indirect emissions from consumption of, the energy. Like the energy can be generated from electricity, the steam, or the cooling systems, right? So this is like a bit like the midstream. Then the third scope is actually all the indirect emissions that occur in the value chain, for all the stakeholders along the entire value chain. So they're trying to tackle this carbon dioxide emissions by these 3 scopes. All right, you can read all about it. Just Google ihsmarket.com and GHGP. You'll find a lot of a ton of these articles about it. Okay, and why I want to show you this is to show you is to highlight to you that the problem is not just in the production of the oil and gas; it's also on the usage of the refined products. Like every day, you and I, we turn on our aircon, all right, or we drive our cars, we are already contributing to this. Is something. It's like a wake up call for every one of us, right? And as I mentioned there, so the first thing to tackle the carbon dioxide is, of course, the governments are trying to stop all investments, right? And they target, right? There are no more new investments. There are no more investments in new fields, but they still need to have investments, or at least on working capital for the existing fields, because like it or not, we cannot hit net zero emissions overnight because it is a process. So along the way, if I ask you today to switch your car to electric car, you can't do it also, right? Other than economic reasons, affordability. The other thing is our infrastructure ready? Don't let us not talk about Malaysia. Even in the most developed countries like China or US, right, are the infrastructure ready for EV? I would say no. It takes time to build this infrastructure over years, right? So it is a process. Now, of course, by 2050, all the capex should only be for existing production as well as refining. No more for new production. No more for transportation, right? So this is the goal. Now, then on the other hand, you stop production. For all these the conventional energy sources. So how do you incentivize the usage for newer or greener energy, right? So this is a chart also by this report, Net Zero by 2050 by IEA. So human activities, we can't, there's no way for us to stop it overnight. So this will contribute to carbon dioxide, but no problem. As you remember, net zero means we counterbalance the emissions of carbon dioxide, by all these other new activities, right? So as you can see here, these very nice colors. There are 2 types of colors that strike out to you, which is the dark green as well as light blue. So which are the dark green? Dark green actually means the wind, the alternative energy production through wind and solar. All right, these can actually significantly reduce the emission of carbon dioxide in a big way, because instead of consuming the energy produced from coal, produced from this batu arang coal or oil and gas, right? Actually, we consume this electric energy produced from wind and solar, right? So this is greatly reduced as compared to if it was produced by the conventional energy sources. Then the other one is light blue, which is electric vehicles. This is the reason why EV is going to catch on. It's going to be the next mega trend. not just for efficiency, right? It's also for the environmental issues, all right? So these are the two major things, and that is why tonight my focus of the talk will be on these two particular topics. Yeah. So of course there are a lot of many ways that we can reduce, we can achieve balancing, maybe through first and foremost behavior and avoided demand. Yeah, but realistically, how much can we change our lifestyle? You know, say, hey, okay, don't go out or take the public transportation all the time. It's not going to happen because we have to be realistic, right? And other things like, you know, building efficiency, manufacturing efficiency, and other activities. You can read all about it in this report. Yeah, I highly encourage for you to read this report if you are interested in this topic. Okay, so next we're going to talking about the big picture now, the cause and effect, you know, and where are the government's focus or where are they driving at, right? So where are the investment opportunities? Because, you know, at the end of the day, all we want, of course, we love the earth. We want to make it sustainable, but of course, at the same time, we would love if there are plenty of investment opportunities for us to achieve this, right? Now, of course, there are plenty. Now, again, I flashed this slide from my previous presentation. This is actually particularly for the oil and gas companies to transition from the current paradigm, the current regime, to the new energy regime. Now, as you can see here, again, this is by McKinsey. I like this quadrant very much because it basically shows you where are the sweet spots for these oil and gas majors to invest in, you know, that they can, remember, it's all about balancing, right? Because they have to continue producing energy from these conventional sources, which will contribute to carbon dioxide. So how can they actually also venture into new energy paradigm that can actually neutralize or balance whatever they produce, all right? So in this chart, it's very easy to read. On the vertical scale, is about the attractiveness in terms of capital. All right, the higher it is, which means you need more capital, it's more capital intensive, which means that it will lead to higher depreciation. Then you need a lot of financial support. Of course, not all companies can achieve the higher scale, right? On the lateral or on the horizontal scale, it's about the competitive positioning of this oil and gas company. Which renewable energy or which green energy paradigm they are more suitable for them. All right. Now, as you can see here, the sweet spot is always in the middle. All right. In terms of capital, it's not too costly, it's not too high, not too low, just nice. And in terms of suitability, it's also just nice. So as you can see here, there are a few alternatives you can choose from. Either they invest in wind or solar. These are all the alternative, renewable energy sources. They can also invest in EV charging, the infrastructure. All right, or the processes. They can also go for biofuel, hydrogen, so on and so forth. But of course, this one could mean more capital or efficiency comes into play. Okay, so again, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but this basically highlights where the oil and gas company can invest in. Now, I remember in my webinar, I talked about Yinsen as one of the case studies for this, how they position themselves, in the new energy paradigm. I think if you recall, Yinsen actually invests a lot in solar. In countries like India, in countries like these European nations, because they want to balance, they want to counterbalance whatever carbon dioxide they produce, from their conventional activities, right? So that's that. So the transformation of global energy from carbon to clean energies, right? As you can see here, where are the opportunities, right? Because the radical transformation, again, as I mentioned, it won't happen overnight. It will happen through a period of time, which requires a lot of capital, which requires a lot of support from the investment world, all right? And so much so that it is estimated by IEA that every single year, there'll be at least $2 trillion on average, right? Sorry, this happened already in the past 5 years, all right? I think between 2016 to 2020, on average, globally, there was a 2 trillion capital investments, all right, towards green energy. And this is going to accelerate in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years. to almost 5 trillion per annum, all right? And by 2030, all right, it's going to be even higher at 4.5 trillion. So you can ask yourself, right, if you want to spot the next mega trend, right, you have to smell where the money is at, isn't it? It's very logical, right? So this statistics, of course, you have to dig deeper into it. Don't just take my word for it, or don't just take IES word for it. Go and find out around what's happening around us, right? Government linked agencies like Suruhan Jaya Tenaga, like, or even or all around the world, what are governments doing, right? They will show you where the focus is, where the money will flow to. Okay. Now, of course, in here, this is the annual average capital investment in the NZE program by IEM. Again, the light blue one is where, by technology area, this is by sector, this is by technology. So I want to focus on technology, right? A lot of capital, a lot of investors will focus on the light blue. And which is light blue? Electricity system. Now, this electricity system includes the generation of electricity, which means, either it's wind, solar power, as well as the storage, as well as infrastructure, like the battery, so on and so forth. So these are where the money is at. Now, in terms of sector, of course, again, electricity generation as well as infrastructure, transportation will be the major this focus. So I want to move a bit deeper into, where are the renewable energy alternatives, as you can see here from the same report, actually a lot of addition of power or energy, right, is going to go, the focus is going to be on solar and wind. As you can see here in 2020, there is about, I would say, less than 300 gigawatts of solar and wind energy being produced around the world. By 2030, 10 years later, that number is going to quadruple 4 times, right? Okay, and this and the majority will be actually will focus on solar PV. And one of the countries that are actually driving this effort, right, is actually China. As well as European countries, but very much relevant to us, China is doing a lot of things, right? And they're investing a lot of money into this. And I believe that countries around the world will follow suit as well. Of course, on the Western side, the European nations are also doing a lot of things. On the other hand, I think US, because they just came off from the Trump administration in the past 4 years, so they have a lot of catch up to do. But I believe the Biden administration would do something drastic also to catch up. Now then, where are the other opportunities? Actually, it's EVs, EV, the sales of electric vehicles is going to go up by 18 times. But of course, the base is quite low. So this number is a bit celestial jump. So you can, just from this basic statistics, you can already guess where the money is going to go to. All right. And the energy intensity per capita, per GDP, right, is going to reduce, which means that as energy becomes more efficient, that actually the efforts to produce the same amount of energy per GDP is going to go down. And if this keep on going down, which means that we are actually doing the right thing. Okay, and this is another snapshot, another angle of the NZE regime. So basically, in terms of total energy supply, you can see here currently in the past 20 years, coal is the major, coal and oil are the major sources of energy because of their supply, ease of supply, as well as cheap cost, especially coal. Then natural gas comes into play as well. But as you can see, after 2020, right, for the next 30 years, these 3 major or what we call conventional sources are going to, the importance or their role are going to diminish, and they're going to be taken over by greener alternatives, renewable alternatives like wind and solar, as well as other RE, including biomass, biogas, biofuels, so on and so forth. But our focus, of course, we want to be smart. We want to go where the big chunk of the focus or the money is going to. As you can see here very clearly, it's going to be in the wind and solar. Okay, so I talk about Biden's administration. This is taken during his campaign, so he's less than I think about 7 months into his presidency. So a lot of things he is trying to achieve. I think he just passed his 100-day report. So these are some of his major or key initiatives which he promised, which is pledged during his campaign. So first is actually the boost for offshore wind, as well as restricting oil and gas development and making it harder for oil and gas infrastructure projects to expand. Okay, I think not just offshore wind. He's also has a lot of initiatives for the solar. Okay, you can read all about it. But what caught my eye is actually his support for electric vehicles. I think this is very important, especially for Malaysia, because we have a lot of industry or a lot of companies that are actually along the value chain of this electric vehicle business, right? So Biden planned to impose tighter fuel economy standards, by helping to boosting the self-electric vehicles. And he targeted that by 2030, there could be 4 million EVs on US roads as a result of those standards. But you may think that 4 million is a lot, but actually 4 million is just scratching the surface, because they expect on the road by 2030 there'll be 275 million vehicles on the road on American roads. So 4 million EVs on the road is actually just like a drop on the ocean, right? Now, in this regard, I personally think that I believe that China is doing a much better job, because they started way before. In fact, if you have followed my previous webinar, right, the new energy vehicle regime has already begun in China since 2010. When they spent a lot of money. I think it was 100 billion renminbi or something. To actually to boost the investment as well as grow this new energy or renewable these electric vehicles industries in China. So all in all, US has a lot to catch up, which for investors is actually a great opportunity, because when they are trying to play catch up, they have to do a lot of things in a very fast way, right? So there'll be a lot of investments pouring into this side of the world, and as long as we can find companies that benefit this, right, we are on the right track. Okay, so that's about it. Maybe just talk a little bit. Now we move into solar. So as you can see here, actually most countries, solar markets are going to grow. In fact, it's one of the easiest. It's one of the I would not say easiest, but the most logical as well as economical renewable energy sources to produce, especially for countries around the equator, like South, like Malaysia, ASEAN countries, India, Africa, Central America, and parts, and so many countries, right, where we have abundant sunlight, right. Actually, solar power is the cheapest, because it's there for us to harness, right. Even if we don't harness, it's there, right. So countries like India and China, they have a huge, massive mega projects to actually electrify their economy using solar power. But as you can see here, this is by Bloomberg, all right, captured from PV magazine. Countries that are driving this consumption of solar power is actually the red color, mainland China, right? That's why I say China is a leader in terms when it comes to solar power, followed by other Asian countries, as well as these North American and the Caribbean countries here. Okay, then okay, in the conservative scenario, between 2020 to 2030, the new capacity for the new solar capacity is going to grow at about 7% per annum. In the optimistic model, this Bloomberg NEF, New Energy Forum, I think they forecast at least about 13%. This is why I show you this, because I want to show you where the opportunities are, right? So definitely this should be one of them. Anything in between, you just pick a number, right? To me, as long as the industry can grow high single digit, that's a huge opportunity already. And assuming on the optimistic scenario, we can grow 13% per annum, right? Especially in China and Asia, right? I think this is a huge opportunity for us. Okay, so this is about the demand. There's a huge demand for solar market in the next 4, 5, 10 a decade or so, right? Then on the other end of the spectrum, the cost of the levelized, this is a term for energy, it's called LCOE, or levelized cost of energy comparison between, this is for utility scale generation. So they compare between, the conventional plants like coal, gas, this nuclear gas speaker, all right? As you can see here, solar, the solar PV crystalline, right? They used to be very expensive to produce. This is basically a number of dollars per megawatt hour. Very expensive, You imagine you need to, in 29, right? You need more than $300 to create a megawatt hour of electricity or energy from solar. But you can see over the years, all right, the cost has drastically tanked or reduced more about 90%, point to point. And this actually shows a lot of things. Number one is very simple. Solar energy, or the cost of producing solar, right, is becoming more and more competitive compared to the others, especially conventional sources. All right, that's one. So it makes more sense. Of course, in 29, when you tell your friends, hey, I want to install a solar roof on my house, or on my building, right? People say you're crazy because it's so expensive, right? But today, right, it's so cheap, that it's actually even cheaper to just install a solar panel compared to, laying the cable from Tenaga or whatnot, right? And there's another angle to look at this. Previously, for solar market to thrive or to survive even, right, they need a lot of government incentives, whether it's tax credits or, grants, or basically a lot of support from monetary support from governments, which means that 10 years ago, when you invest in solar companies, right, it's very volatile. Any change in policy, any change in regulatory, any change in administration, right, will actually affect geopolitical tensions, like tariffs and whatnot, will affect the profitability or the bottom line of these solar companies. But as the cost of solar production becomes lower and lower, right, the need for subsidies is going to become less and less. So much so that I'm sure that is why countries like China, right, they are actually reducing their subsidies, their credits for solar companies, because they are already profitable and they can regulate on their own. They are self-sustainable, and which means that moving forward, the investment merits or the investability of these solar companies should be more stable compared to 10 or more than 10 years ago. And this is what I'm going to try to highlight here as well. All right. A lot of problems related last time, which related to policies, regulatory or government decisions, right? It's going to become less and less important. All right. In now, as presently, as well as years to come. Okay. And on top of that, the entire cost for solar systems will continue to fall from this report by COSM. If you take 2019 as a base, they expect the cost of constructing a solar system, right? So which includes the solar cells, the modules, the wiring, the panels, the real estate, the grid connection, and so on and so forth, as well as the electrical parts, like inverters, battery packs, is going to greatly reduce by 37%. Okay, so first of all, you have a great demand trend. You have falling costs. You have diminishing costs for the materials. You have diminishing costs of construction as well as maintenance. This will actually, this is a great economic opportunity, not just for investors, but for governments as well as many stakeholders around the world. Okay. And in China is, as I mentioned, is leading this race with solar. And in fact, you can read a lot of articles. China is going to achieve what they call the grid parity as fast as 2025. Now, what it means by grid parity? Grid parity basically means that the cost of the levelized cost of electricity using this renewable green energy is going to be lower than conventional energy. As you can see here, the black line here is actually the coal. I think USC is, I forgot what's the name for it, but basically the power generation cost from wind and solar, all right, is going to be competitive. It's even going to be lower than the conventional coal. And this is very important because this will incentivize more and more usage of this renewable energy. And this is very important. Okay, and that is why in China, last year, right, actually their installation of this renewable energy, which includes solar, majority solar as well as others like wind, they actually went up a lot, right? But of course, other countries like European nations as well, United States, they're also doing the same. Okay, and I believe this is gonna continue, right? And because the other factor is actually the efficiency of the solar cells is going to improve, right? Do you know how efficient is our solar cells currently? I'm talking about commercial level. I'm not talking about in the lab, right? Now, this is a chart by NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So basically, they collaborate, they combine all the data around the world from labs around the world to see what is the trend, the trend, right? So currently, the commercial efficiency we are looking is about 20%, give and take around there. The largest solar cell produced in the world, like LONGi Energy in China, they are the largest monocrystalline solar cells producer. They are between 70 to 20%, depending on what type of cells, right? So, is this? If you ask me, 20% actually is very low efficiency. It's even worse than the turbine, right, or the internal combustion engine. Okay, but do I see this as like a cup half full instead of half empty? Because there are actually a lot of room for improvement. As you can see here, wow, how about this? How about these different technologies that actually promises up to 47% of conversion energy? Now, what is this efficiency means? It means that imagine 100% of solar come into it. By right, you're supposed to produce 100% electricity equivalent, right? But in terms using the conventional methods, commercial technology available, we can only produce 20%, which means 100% solar power, we can only produce 20% of equivalent electricity, which is very low, all right? And forgive me, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because it's something which is very important. I mean, which I think is very important if you are interested into the solar investment, right? So a lot of our solar cells produced now is what we call the single crystal, which means it's only one type of silicon. Now, how solar is being generated is if you are a electronics, you have electronics background, it's easier for you to understand, right? So in a silicon, all right, there is basically two junctions, right? So the positive and the negative. So the material, the solar cells, what it does is when it receives sunlight, the solar power from the sun, it agitates one of the junction. I mean, what the material, right? So there is going to be a jump. So I'm talking about in very layman's term. There's going to be a jump in terms of the photons, the molecules, right? Because of the agitation from the solar power. So because of this silicon, there's a junction in between the positive and the negative, right? So every time there's a jump, it's going to produce electricity. And this jump through this thing called the band gap can be harnessed to produce electricity. And of course, you're thinking, in that case, if I increase the band gap so that it jumps further, then more electricity is produced, or we can introduce more gaps, all right, to agitate more the jumps of the photons, right? We can produce more energy. So that is the idea, and that is why we are moving from single silicon, to actually what we call the multi junctions. But the multi junctions right now are still very much theoretical. That is why all this purple color, you can see all this high efficiency, right, only can be produced in the lab, which means it's either commercially not justifiable or not feasible to produce, or they are not ready yet. They cannot be produced in a utility scale. All right, but I believe you give it time. Give it time. The 5G technology that we are enjoying today was actually invented 3 decades ago. So the same thing is going to happen here. Whatever technology that they are researching now, I believe it will eventually be commercialized. Maybe give it 20 years, 30 years down the road, which is fine to me, because remember, we have a long road to go. Net zero emissions for carbon dioxide by 2050, by 2070. Hopefully, I'm still around. Maybe not. Okay, but these are the current theoretical efficiencies. But what is more interesting right now, actually, a lot of solar produced is no more the monocrystals. All right, it's actually a lot of these solar cells produced today are thin film. Why thin film is very important, or very commercially more feasible? Because the old solar cells, I'm sure you have seen it, is blue in color. It's very bulky, right? And it needs to be placed on a certain frame or certain panel, right? Which means that in order to install these panels on your buildings or on your surfaces, it's not too easily available, because you need to the installation site needs to fulfill certain criteria. But when it comes to thin film, of course, how this can be achieved, you have to look at how the crystals are being organized, right? Thin film technologies are so important, or so popular right now, because you can basically apply the film on any surface, like glass. These days, a lot of buildings are using glass now because of aesthetic values and whatnot, right? You can imagine you can stick, or you can apply the thin film on the glasses, which straight away your building becomes a power generator, right? So that's why thin film is getting very popular. But to me, actually, I'm focusing more on the emerging PV, right? Especially these perovskite cells. Perovskite cells, compared to conventional silicon or other polysilicon's, right? They are more stable. They can sustain better heat. They can sustain more moisture, which means that they are not so easily damaged. And what is more interesting is actually, okay, here my animation is not working. Is this? Their efficiency is much higher than the conventional. As you can see here, these are the wavelength of the visible spectrum of the sunlight. All right, you can see here that actually the perovskite, adding with other materials, they can actually have a much higher absorption in a much wider wavelength, which means that this material, compared to other materials like your silicon and other conventional like gallium arsenide, so on and so forth, they can actually absorb more sunlight and produce more electricity. Okay, so absorb the same amount of sunlight but produce a high amount of electricity because of the materials. So what I'm trying to say here is, in order for us to have high efficiency, there are two things. One is materials, as I mentioned here, and the other one is, of course, the semiconductor, right, that is being used. Now, another thing which I did not mention here is actually the physical state of the solar panels. Now, these days, there are a lot of talks about, how solar panels are just being one phase. Now we're talking about bifacial, which means that instead of just one side which can capture energy, sunlight, actually there are two sides that can capture energy, which means actually, layman term wise, it can almost double up, the absorption rate. Now, secondly, there are other things like, instead of one single cell, one cell like this, they call it the half cut. Now, what this is very important is because when you half cut, which means in between there will be other elements like aluminum and circuitry and whatnot, right? The heat generated won't be concentrated too much onto one single cell. Imagine one big cell, then you concentrate on the sunlight, it's become too hot, so it will reduce the efficiency, right? But if you cut it by half, basically you distribute the heat dissipation, the heat concentrated from the sunlight. So in a way, it will also improve the efficiency of the solar cells. Now, there are many ways to improve, not just for materials, not just for semiconductor, right? I encourage you to read about it, especially those companies from China, right? Shane, sorry about it. I overrun the time again. It's 9:30, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Okay, so I hope you are not sleeping yet. I hope you're learning something a little bit from my sharing. So let's move on to talk about, to wrap things up, see what are the investment merits, of this renewable energy, especially when it comes to solar. Now, as I mentioned here, so I basically structure the framework of the investment advantage, the pros and cons. So number one, as I showed you earlier, there's a lot of demand push from countries, from governments, or a lot of regulatory, being put in place, being enforced, to drive the demand for renewable energy, especially solar and wind. All right, there are supportive policies by governments, by government agencies to do this. Like even companies are doing that. Like you hear a lot of these car companies, they say they want to stop production of ICE by 2030, or countries like France and Germany, they want to stop, they want to have zero ICE cars on the road. Or these are all the policies that I'm talking about. Declining costs. I talk about the LCOE. I talk about the total construction cost, which is on the declining trend. And remember about the grid parity. Okay, so this will actually drive all the demand. Drive the economics of this renewable as well. And last but not least, the technology. So I talk about the different materials, the different structure, the physical structure, the semiconductor, right? Previously. Now, of course, anything will have risks. For example, a lot of people are arguing, the other camp that do not support these solar cells. Is oh yeah, the production process of solar cells is actually very hazardous to the environment, which is true, because the production of the solar cells require a lot of chemicals, all right, which again, it boils down to how we treat or how we manage these waste. Of course, if you just turn on the tap and let all these waste flow into the river, that is hazardous, right? And in fact, not just cells, a lot of other human manufacturing activities are doing the same, or not, if not worse. It is what is important is how we deal with it. All right, so that's one hazard. Now, of course, incentives and tariffs play a role, but as I mentioned, this element is going to be less and less impactful because of the cost. The lower cost is going to overpower. I'm sorry, no. Is the lower cost of these solar cells or these solar modules, solar systems, is going to diminish the impact from these incentives as well as tariffs enforced by different countries around the world. Raw materials costs may, sometimes it may spike up, may come down. So these are very cyclical, very common in all the manufacturing sectors. And last but not least is perhaps something which is more relevant to investors, because right now, until this point, there is not a lot of case studies or a lot not successful renewable energy projects in terms of large scale that has a very attractive return of investment, not as attractive as in the oil and gas industry in the heydays. So, but I believe this will change as the technology become more advanced, costs are being driven low, and there are more and more supportive policies that support this. Right, I believe this RI regime will also improve. So, to me, the benefits outweighs the risks. That's why, although I do not have personally, I do not have much investments in renewable energy, but I believe this is a mega trend that we should look at. Okay, so let's move on with the remaining time, talk about the case studies in Bursa Malaysia. Now, I first have to apologize. I only have 2 case studies tonight, which I'm just going to touch through. So I hope you're not disappointed. Reason is because there are not many companies in Malaysia, right, in Bursa Malaysia, that actually does pure solar, renewable or solar players, right? But let me just go through the slides. This again, this is extracted from the same COSA report. Actually, basically to show you what is the power generation mix by region. Let's focus on Asia Pac as well as global. Now we can see here in Asia Pacific, which Malaysia is in, the majority of the power is being generated by coal. All right, and then you see, wow, then so renewable energy, not much chance, right? I beg to differ. In fact, this again, I see that there's a huge opportunity for this dominance or this dependence on coal to be changed or to be shifted. All right. imagine in the next 10 years, right, we can actually, just half of this core is going to be replaced by solar or wind. I mean, in Malaysia, it's all about solar and other renewables like biogas, biofuels, right? There's a lot of opportunities here. And globally as well, right, about half or at least 40% of the power is generated through coal. So I think there is a lot of incentive, a lot of opportunities, a lot of incentives to actually to switch this into renewable energy, right? And again, just to recap, so I talk a lot about the electrification opportunities and opportunities in the electric vehicles, right? Actually, I talk in the previous seminars, the webinars, I talk a lot about all these case studies, and they are interrelated, and that's how I like to structure my webinars. I think Shane will agree with me. I don't just come on the platform and say, hey, okay, I talk about this topic. These are the case studies. No, actually, what I'm trying to do is to structure a storyline so that it is seamless and it is relevant. Each topic is interrelated. So I talked about Yinsen before, which is again one of the oil and gas companies that is trying to actually switch to renewable in order for them to earn enough tax credits in order for them to sustain their existing activities. So we talk on the electrification side, like EVs, the batteries. I talk about Great Tech, I talk about Genetech in the previous webinar. I talk about MPI, so on and so forth. So you can refer to those for that angle. All right. But tonight, my angle is actually on solar. And as you can see here, actually, if you read the latest report by our Suruhan Jaya Tenaga, so they already planned for the next, I think this was already enforced by the previous government before PH, right? I think during when Yo Be-in was the minister. So we already have set a target, say, hey, by 2025, right? At least 20% of our energy produced in Malaysia is going to come from renewable. And a lot of this is going to focus on actually solar. 60% of this new renewable energy is going to come from solar. And that's why there's a lot of investments going on in Malaysia. That's why you hear about this LSS, right? Large scale solar power plant, right? From the first installment LSS1 or to the latest one, I think it's called Mentari or something. Almost 1 gigawatt lah. Not all the 1 gigawatts are being awarded. But the problem in Malaysia is this: the contracts, the EPCC contracts, right? For the newer LS projects are getting so thin. The margins are so thin, and the prices are so competitive, right? That it's very hard for these solar companies to really make money. And that is why a lot of solar players in Malaysia, or put in another way, if you want to look for solar players in Malaysia that I personally think will have the competitive advantage, right? Look for those companies that are also venturing overseas out of Malaysia. Now, a lot of solar-related companies, not just listed ones, even the Sendirian Berhad, right? They focus a lot on Malaysia, all right, as you know, the business environment. So I think it's one of the biggest limiting factor. I believe that if these companies can venture, they are competitive enough to bid for overseas projects like the Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan, right? I believe that a lot of these projects overseas will actually bring higher margins or higher return on investments for them compared to those in Malaysia. Now, not that I don't support, I fully support the Malaysian government's initiatives to do this, all right, to actually be aligned with the Conference of Paris 2021, right? But I believe you have to make the environment attractive enough, you need to have the right policies in place. You have to drive the business community, not just the producers, but as well as the consumers, right? Yeah, you say you want to push these manufacturers towards green energy, but what are you doing when it comes to the infrastructure? So all this need to be aligned, all right, in order for us to achieve this aspiration of 20% renewable energy by 2025. In fact, it doesn't start at 2025. In 2030, as you can see from here, we are trying, I think we are aspiring to do as much as 25% being generated by renewable energy. Now, I just want to clarify here, hydroelectric, in a way, actually is also very much a renewable energy because, the water sources are renewable. All right, they're always there as long as there's rain. But in terms of the ESG context, right, hydroelectricity is not really an environmental friendly source of energy because of deforestation, as well as the destruction of communities around the area that is being built. Because you need a huge land to build the dam, right? And it may lead to other environmental issues like floods, which is happening in Henan, right? So again, this is a very touchy issue, and the balance is very sensitive. So that's why when it comes to renewable energy, generally we don't really talk about hydro. Okay, so let's look at what are the companies that are actually involved in the renewable energy, right? So I list some of them here. Of course, these are not the only list of companies. There are a lot as well. So forgive me if I miss out one of your favorite companies, but these are the companies that I personally know. Okay, so there are not a lot of pure players for solar in Malaysia or on Bursa Malaysia. So the ones that I know are SolarVest as well as the Maidan. Both of them only recently IPO, so there's not a lot of historical performance for me to do a reference, but they're pretty okay. I think they're pretty doing very well. The market cap is quite sizable, especially for this SolarVest, about 700 over million. I think this week the share price went out quite a fair bit, right? Because they've been on the downtrend. They are one of the pure EPCC players for solar rooftop, large-scale solar power plants. They also provide all these operational and maintenance services. They also own some solar plants. Okay, the same goes for Samaidan. Now, why I note this is because majority, if not all, of their revenue actually comes from solar. Now, with other like V Solar, although their name there's a solar there, but I noted from the annual report that only 30% of their revenue actually is from solar, so I'm not too sure about it. You can also look into other renewable angles, like Eversendai. Eversendai, interestingly, they fabricate and construct offshore wind substations for their clients in Europe, but it's only contribute 10% of the revenue, so not a very big revenue generator. Other renewable sources like biogas, hydro, right? So we've got other players like CY Park, MFCB, which is a very good investment grade company. Then on the other angle, as I mentioned, because 70 to 80% of the carbon dioxide emissions comes from transportation, we can also look into the angle by EV, whether it's EV production like GridTech, this EV battery production like GridTech, or even Genentech, right? So on and so forth. Now, there are also other emerging companies like RE Nicola. That's recently, I think there was an RTO or something. The company is actually Pimpinan Ehsan Berhad. So I think this new management is trying to take over the company and pump the solar business into the company. Nothing is disclosed yet in terms of the revenue, so I can't really talk much about it. But there are other companies like JAX, KAB, Renhill, Pestech, Reservoir Link. They're also, in a way, they are part of the value chain of the renewable energy. So I think you can look into these companies if you're interested. Okay, but let me just very quickly run through the couple of case studies. One is the SolarVest. Now, SolarVest is a recently IPO company. I think they are majority owned by the forgot what's the construction company name again. Chin Hin Group, yeah, Chin Hin, as well as a Blue something, but they own about almost
Blue Atlantic,
half.
Atlantic Blue.
Yeah, Atlantic Blue. Thanks for that. I guess you're an investor, right, Shane?
No,
but the revenue, the latest revenue is about slightly more than 200 million. But the valuation is quite stretched, if you ask me, about almost close to 50 times the PE. The net margin is about 7.2%, so single digit. But what I like about this company is actually the order book is quite healthy. You see, their FY21 revenue is 200 over million, and the current order book is 316 million. And this is a lot supported by, they are winning a lot of these LSS4 EPC contracts. I think the latest one that they announced was from this 20 megawatt plant in Kulim by Energy ES. Before that, they also won something by MKLand, which is part of the entire LSS4 project, right? But again, as I mentioned, the margins for this LSS4 is not as good as the previous ones. So although the order book looks very nice, All right, just be mindful about the profitability of these contracts. Yeah. So again, these are some of the statistics. But what I like about this company again is because, as I mentioned before, you want to look for solar companies that actually are competitive, that can bid for overseas projects because of the more lucrative return, right? So as I know, actually they are also bidding. They have in the order book of 300 over million. They have some from Philippines as well as Taiwan. And in fact, I read some reports that actually the EPCC contract in Taiwan are very attractive because the Taiwanese government is trying to incentivize, the solar power generation in the country, right? So this is probably one of the, I would say, the investment merits for SolarBest. But on top of that, SolarBest is also involved in advanced modules. I talk about, how what are the factors that contribute to high efficiency of solar cells, right? I talk about half-cut technology. I talk about bifacial solar modules, right? So they are also doing this. Like he mentioned, same piece of land, same piece of real estate for the solar construction, but double the output. So these are the things. I think they tick all these boxes for SolarBest. That's why I think they are on the right track. Okay. And on top of that, they also have a very good ESG track record, being in the renewable energy space. But what I would like to focus actually on, they are doing a lot of things to conserve the environment. Again, whatever they do, they are trying to stimulate the clean energy adoption. That is in their business DNA. But what interests me, or what is important to me, is how they manage the waste. As I mentioned, the usage or the production of solar cells will actually the byproduct is a lot of harmful chemicals, which if it's not managed properly, right, it's going to harm the environment even more. That's why I believe that this part, the E of the ESG for solar company at SolarBest is very important, other than the people as well as the bad practices. You can read about this later. Yeah. Now, the next company I want to talk about, sorry for being a bit fast, is really Samaidan. Samaidan is much smaller company compared to SolarBest, but personally, I believe their quantitative merits are much better than SolarBest. But again, SolarBest has their other advantages. All right. Samaidan, in terms of valuations, are not as stretched as this SolarBest, but still a bit high. But I like their net margins. They have a better margin, close to 10%, and their operating cash flow margin is double, at least double of SolarBest, which I like. Their ability to generate cash flow from the revenue. Now, the order book is a bit of concern because I think the revenue as of 2020 was 76 million, and the current order book is only 31 million. So you may need to look into this if you're interested in this company. But both SolarBest and Samaidan, they have a net cash balance sheet, which to me is not too surprising because they are recently IPO and they have some rights issues going on. So their balance sheet should be pretty strong. All right. Again, like most of the solar companies in Malaysia, Samaidan also mostly their projects are in Semenanjung Peninsula, Malaysia. So other than overseas venture, right, you should also try to look for solar companies that are venturing into East Malaysia, because comparatively, the profitability, the EPC contracts in Malaysia are actually higher or better, more lucrative, more attractive than those in Peninsula. But the problem, especially in Sarawak, is solar is a bit tough. Number one is because of the geographical structure, because in Sarawak there's a lot of mountains and hills, right? It's not in order for us to produce, to produce a very good business case for solar, you need to have abundant land, especially as flat as possible. And on top of that, in Sarawak, actually hydro is one of the main, is the main generator of electricity. That's why it's a bit hard for solar to tap into this state. But in Sabah is another different story, okay? And coming back to Samaidan, what I like about Samaidan is actually they also start to venture into overseas like Vietnam. So I think this is probably, although it's small, but probably it is something that we can we can keep track on if you're interested. So I think with that, I'd just like to wrap things up. Basically, this is just a slide to talk about the alignment of green energy movement towards ESG agenda. Now, a lot of listed companies, Bursa Malaysia, they do export overseas, and with the recent round of ESG criteria, right, and climate-aligned policies and regulations, going green should be part of the DNA of any business already. this does not only involve companies that produces energy, but also companies that consumes energy, right? The ESG criteria should be there for sustainability as well as to attract more investment, especially from foreign parties, right? Where ESG criteria is a must-have right now. All right, just look at Tenaga, because Tenaga Malaysia, although it's an investment grade company, because majority of the fuel is actually from coal, that's why they score very poorly in the ESG. So this is very important, right? And on top of that, in the medium term or the longer term, Malaysia has also signed on the RCEP, all right, which is supposed to remove 29% of tariffs between partner signatories. And Bursa Malaysia companies will soon be facing more competition, right, from companies in the region, right? So I mean, this RCEP is, I mean, our companies listed in Malaysia, or especially those listed, right, they'll have to buckle up, right, and to face stiffer competition moving forward, right. And that is why, whatever we do, right, not just for energy companies, we have to align our businesses strategies, have to align with the ESG agenda, right, in order to number one, for sustainability, and last and more importantly, to be competitive, as well as to attract all the necessary investments. Okay, Shane, I do apologize. This is a new topic to me as well, so I think I spent a bit more time talking about some of the things. So over to you. Any Q&A?
Yes, thank you so much, David. No worries, you're still on time, okay? Not yet 10 o'clock, okay? So we still have time for question and answer, although that we will cut short the Q&A lah. Huh?
Okay.
So if any question for David, right, please write in the Q&A box and then we will address them, okay? Of course, due to time constraint, we can only address 1 to 2 questions. Now, the first question is asked by Andy. Now, in the previous government with our former minister, YB Yobing, so we really remember that there were a lot of solar power and incentive program. So the question here is this incentive still in place now, or the green policy has changed under the new government?
This question, Shane, why you choose this kind of question for me?
I think it's not covered in your slide, so I
No, yeah, but your guess is as good as mine, with our government like this now. In fact, everything has been installed, in a store. Frozen, put in the freezer in the past, I think 1.5 years. I feel very sad. I think we wasted our past 1.5 years, despite the pandemic, pandemic aside, right? Because a lot of policies, which is you're right, Andy. A lot of policies, green policies, that was laid out by the previous administration, right? I don't follow it religiously, but I think they are not being enforced. Things may change. I think things will change, but I hope that whichever government is going to come online, I personally feel I think the wind of change is there already now. Whether it's the current government or the new upcoming government, right? I hope that they will, politics aside, all right, parties aside, right? I hope that they will still focus on this green energy, because this is not just about Malaysia. This is really about the sustainability of the environment, which involves everyone. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't have the details for your answer. But I think Andy asked about wind as well, right? Unfortunately, because of our geographical makeup of Malaysia, I don't think wind is a viable option. Because of course there are two types of wind energy. One is offshore, one is onshore. Of course, the offshore one is much more capital intensive and much more challenging in terms of technology. But even on the onshore, right, ask yourself, right, do we have a lot of land, flat land, or do you have a lot of wind power, right? We don't. Now, the reason why a lot of European countries are going for wind is because they are not like us. Countries like Malaysia or Asia, most part of Asia, right, or ASEAN, we sit near the equator and we have abundant solar energy. Now, European countries like Norway, like United Kingdom, like France, like Germany, right, they are far away from the equator. So in a year, their sunlight exposure, right, is very limited compared to us. But what they have abundance is because their land is pretty flat compared to us, so their wind can travel very fast, and they have a lot of I mean, the geographical structure is just nice for them to harness the wind power, especially countries like Ireland, where they have a lot of shoreline that can capture the wind. So that is why countries like Europe, in Europe, they are more incentivized to focus more on wind energy. But in Malaysia or most part of Asia, unfortunately, no.
Okay. Yeah. If I may add on to the
Yeah, please do.
some response to the questions, right? In the past, we have LSS large scale solar project. We also have the net energy metering project.
Yep.
I think just now David talked about LSS, right? So energy metering is where you can install solar panel and then sell back the excess energy back to the grid. Okay, and another program that our energy commission has is the feed-in tariff program, whereby you can use renewable energies to generate electricity, right? You can actually charge the grid, you can sell the electricity back to the grid at a premium rate lah.
Yeah, but is it still premium rate? I understand the rates are getting lower and lower, right?
Yeah, for 21 years, if I'm not mistaken. For more information, you can refer back to the SEDA website.
Yes. Yeah, you can actually get a lot of information from the SEDA website. You're right.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that.
For now, the net energy metering project still got the NEM 3.0 still have a fire. I think the quota is 500 megawatt until.
Is it been taken out already?
I think not entirely taken out, so
okay.
still got. All right. So the next question is coal still essential since they use to power the EV? This is asked by Stephen Ng.
Is coal essential since you use power? Yes. Right now, that's why. Let me go. You're still on my slide, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about a country. Let's talk about China, because China, as you know, is one of they are on the fourth. They are the leader in this race. Right now, coal is still very much relevant in countries like China, Malaysia, right? In terms of electricity generation. Why? Because it's cheap, it's abundant, and no matter how how altruistic we are, right? At the end of the day, it's still about economics. It's still about dollars and cents. All right, so that is why coal, the importance of the relevance of coal is still going to be there. It's still going to stick around. All right, even to power the electric vehicles. I know a lot of the left-wing camps are blasting the EV camps, saying, "Oh, you say you're driving clean cars, but the electricity used to generate to power your battery are actually from dirty sources," which is true for now. That's why I say grid parity is very important. In countries like China, which is the forerunner of this renewable energy, especially solar, right? They should be able to reach grid parity and beyond, all right, by 2025. And that when that time comes, right, the importance of the relevance of coal, I believe, would diminish. It will be less and less relevant. And the same thing will also come to Malaysia. Although Malaysia, our pace is much, much slower. As you can see from here, even by 2030, 10 years from now, right, we will still be dependent on coal. 1/3 of our power generated will still be from coal, assuming we can achieve this. That's why a strong government is very stable, is very important, because you lay out a policy, you have to enforce it. There's just like the question by Andy. You have to have the right ministers. You have to have the right administration, the right ministries to oversee this. You cannot just simply change policies every 3 or 2 years in Malaysia, right? So again, government is very important. They play a very important role to ensure that this happens. Okay, Shane, sorry about that.
So let's do one last question. It's asked by Eric. Okay, you mentioned that China is investing a lot of money into this solar sector. So how do you see regulatory risks or crackdown by the CCP on these companies when they got big and profit-deriving companies in the future?
Wow, this is a very long-term question. Actually, China, I think they are doing everything right in terms of renewable energy. Of course, there are a lot of reasons why China is cracking down on the companies that you mentioned or the sectors that you're mentioning now, for which reasons which is not related to renewable energy, right? But in terms of the renewable energy, as I mentioned before, actually China is pulling back a lot of subsidies as well, incentives, because the industry is already able to sustain on their own. And right now, I think China, what they're trying to do is to make this to make this closer and closer to the free market model, right? And like it or not, in terms of geopolitical risk, I know that previously a lot of American companies are accusing the Chinese players on not playing the fair game, because they've got a lot of support from government in terms of tax credits, things like that, right? But if you think about it, they're also doing the same thing, The Biden administration, they are pouring so much money into renewable, pouring so much into semiconductor in the name of national security, right? So that aside, I think coming back to China, I believe the government is doing everything right. You can see a lot of showcase or use case of their solar generated power. I think there are some cities, I can't name any of them right now from the back of my head, but I remember there are a couple of cities in China. They are entirely powered by solar. All right, so this will make a very good case. A very good example to the world. And eventually, of course, when the companies became too big to fail, or they become monopoly that stifles fair market or free market or fair market practices, I think the government, the administration may do something about it. Case in point, the largest tech company in Shanghai now is actually Long-E Energy. It's not a tech company. When I'm talking about tech company, I'm not talking about big techs like Alibaba, right, or Tencent. I'm talking about semiconductor companies. I'm talking about technology companies. The largest by market cap is actually Long-E Energy, and shows you how important this solar industry is. How important it is in China. Yeah. So if you want to look towards a example of how a proper or successful government is in tackling all this renewable energy and pushing this new renewable energy agenda, just look at China. Of course, a lot of countries like Europe nations is also on par. US has a lot to catch up, as I mentioned. And I think as long as we are on the right mega trend, right, I believe that we should be able to make money and at the same time save the world. Okay, Shane. With that note, I think we can call it a night.
Yeah. Actually, China also ventured into nuclear.
No choice. I mean, if you think about it, they are so big, right? Their demand for energy is so huge, they cannot just rely on one source. In fact, there is another angle which I try not to touch. One of the reasons why they want to venture into renewable is because they want to reduce dependency on oil. Remember, China imports most of the oil demand, right? So one of the angles or one of the arguments is that one of the reasons that incentivize the Beijing government to invest and to push this renewable is because they want to be self-sustainable. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, David, for sharing with us opportunities in the green energy sector. So thank you, David.
Yeah, please forgive me if there may be some parts that I lack of, because this again is quite new to me as well. But I hope you enjoy this session. Yeah.
Certainly. All right. So let me go to when is the next webinar? So our next webinar is on next Monday, which is on this topic, pengurusan risiko untuk portfolio saham. So this will be in the Malay language. So the date is 2nd August, which is next Monday, 8:30 to 10 o'clock. So the registration link will be given you in the chat group and also in the YouTube chat. So if you want to learn more how to manage your risk for your stock portfolio, please join this session. Okay, it will be conducted in Malay. So with that, thank you so much, David, for joining our session as a speaker to talk about opportunities in the green energy. I think today we have learned a great deal about solar, about the climate change, about green energy, and about the material use, or even in the solar PV panel. Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shane. Thank you, everyone.
All right. So for all of you here, stay safe in this pandemic. So yeah, see you on next Monday, and
thank you.
Continue to
stay
support
safe.
our Malaysian athlete. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. All the best.